My name is Michael, and in 2009, I worked night shifts as a lone security guard at an abandoned psychiatric hospital in Essex, England. That place was a macabre relic of the 1980s, with peeling walls and echoes of dark stories about patients who never left alive. I made rounds alone, holding a flashlight that barely cut through the darkness and a radio that sputtered more than it worked. It was a bitter winter night that made your bones ache, and the wind howled through broken windows as if the building itself were breathing. Around 2 in the morning, while climbing to the second floor, I froze. Dragging, slow footsteps came from the corridor that held the old isolation cells. The sound was wet, like someone pulling bare feet through a puddle. My heart sped, but I thought it might be trespassers, teenagers seeking a thrill. I gripped the flashlight and called out, my voice trembling more than I wanted. "Who's there?" And the air thickened as if something watched me. I decided to move forward, sweeping the beam down the hallway. Turning the corner, my blood ran cold. There he stood, a tall figure in a dingy white coat, caught in the middle of the corridor. But there was no face. Where eyes, a nose, and a mouth should have been, there was only a smooth surface like wax melted over a mask. There was no expression, yet I felt him watching me. My breath froze and my legs turned to stone. He made no sound, not even a breath, but began to glide slowly toward me, seeming to float inches above the floor. I tried to scream, but my voice vanished. I spun and ran for the stairs, the flashlight beam dancing wildly across the walls. I reached the exit door on the ground floor, one I swear I'd left unlocked, but now it was locked. I forced the handle as panic rose in my throat, hearing a faint dragging behind me. My hand shook so badly I could barely turn the key. But when I finally opened the door, the corridor was empty. The figure was gone. Then a low whisper, almost inside my head, said, "Come back tomorrow." It was cold and calm and not human. I ran to the parking lot, the frigid air burning my lungs. I never returned for another shift, nor ever went back. They asked me to explain why I abandoned duty, but how could I tell that story without sounding mad? The hospital was demolished years later, but other guards told me the faceless figure still appeared, always in the same corridor, always offering the same whispered invitation. I will never know what he wanted, and I pray I never find out. The memory clings like frost. I keep the scar of that night in the hush of my chest. My name is Daniel Foster, and in 2014 I was the keeper of the Penfield Reef Lighthouse in Connecticut. Built in 1874, that lighthouse was a lonely beast, surrounded by miles of icy sea, soaked in a history of shipwrecks and keepers who never made it back home. I thought I liked the solitude, or at least believed I did, until that stormy night that changed everything. It was an October evening. The wind howled like a wounded animal, and the waves smashed against the rocks with such force that the lighthouse itself seemed to tremble. I was in the engine room, checking the generator, when I heard something impossible. The sound of children's laughter, high-pitched and playful, drifting from upstairs. My stomach turned. I was alone, and the lighthouse stood miles off the coast. There was no way a child could be there. Instinct, more than courage, made me grab my flashlight and climb the spiral staircase. Each step groaning beneath my weight. At the top, in the lantern room, the laughter stopped. The beam of the lighthouse cut through the storm outside. But inside, there was only silence, broken by the crash of waves. That's when I saw it, a soaked rag doll lying on the floor, as though dragged straight from the bottom of the ocean. Its fabric was moldy, its button eyes crooked, and water dripped from it, pooling at my feet. I bent down to pick it up, trying to make sense of how it got there, when suddenly the lighthouse light went out. Darkness swallowed me whole, and the silence shattered with the icy grip of a tiny hand on my leg, small fingers clinging like wet seaweed. I screamed and flicked on my flashlight, my heart pounding, but there was nothing, except the doll, now on the other side of the room, as if it had been hurled. My body shook, my mind blank, and I bolted, stumbling down the spiral stairs 2 at a time, until I reached the control room. I locked the door and stayed there until morning, frozen in place, waiting for the daylight as if it alone could save me. When the sun finally rose, I forced myself back up to the lantern room. The doll was still there, untouched, but the window made my stomach twist with horror. Tiny handprints, wet and smeared, covered the glass. Handprints that were impossibly high, meters above the ocean. No one could have climbed that far, least of all a child. That week, I quit for good. At first I told no one, terrified they'd think me insane. But when a local paper came to interview me, I let the story slip. Now the lighthouse is monitored remotely, and I've never set foot near the sea again. Yet sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear that laughter in my dreams. My name is Kenji Sato, and in 2018, I worked as a night guard in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Tokyo. The place was a skeleton from World War II, once used to store military supplies. And the older locals whispered that the spirits of dead soldiers had never left those walls. And I sat in the control room, watching the security monitors. That's when I noticed something strange. In the corner of the warehouse, a dark, human-shaped shadow moved across the screen. But when I switched to the live camera feed, the spot was empty. Just stacks of crates and dust. My stomach twisted, yet I grabbed my baton and flashlight, telling myself it was just a glitch in the system. After all, I was alone, and the warehouse stood in an isolated lot, far from any living soul. Stepping into the storage area, a piercing cold wrapped around me, as if I had plunged into icy water. My breath turned to vapor, even though the night was warm. Then came the sound, a low murmur, spoken in old Japanese, like a prayer whispered by someone unseen. The hairs on my neck bristled, but I forced my feet to move forward. That's when I saw it. A tall, humanoid shadow, hovering a few inches above the ground. It had no face, only a void of darkness where features should have been. My flashlight quivered in my hand, and the beam seemed swallowed whole by its presence. The shadow raised one arm, slowly pointing toward a cracked wall. Against every instinct, I followed the gesture and found a sealed metal box, rusted and hidden behind a stack of wooden planks. It wasn't in the warehouse records. None of us had ever seen it before. I tried to lift the lid, but the moment I touched the metal, as if invisible hands were crushing me to the floor. The murmurs grew louder, now a chorus of voices, while the shadow drifted closer, silent and suffocating. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I dropped the box and ran, stumbling over crates, nearly losing my flashlight. I locked myself inside the control room and stayed there, gasping, until the first light of dawn. The next day, I returned with a colleague, but the box was gone, as if it had never existed. The shadow did not return, yet the cold and the whispers haunted my dreams. I quit shortly afterward and shared the story on a podcast, hoping that speaking it aloud would free me. The warehouse was demolished in 2020, but I later heard from other workers who claimed to feel the same crushing weight on their shoulders and saw shadows they couldn't explain. I know what I saw, and I pray I never learn what was inside that box.